Prologue. Pellets for a rat. The fourth night of winter, just after sunset. In Cleft, the little town between the mountain passes where the Stone Creek flowed down towards the Mendarian, the wind began to rise, picking up from the west with the weight of a dying storm somewhere off Okeanos. Most of the town had already fallen silent, and save for the glowing lights of a small tavern at the entrance to Cleft, the only illumination came from the fading moon. Gendro was not a smart man, nor a necessarily hard-working man, nor a particularly skilled man, but he was content, and in this town that was enough. If you had wandered the streets, found the locals who truly called Cleft their home, you'd find very few dreams and even less ambition. Like Gendro, most people in Cleft were simply content, serving the small stream of travelers that came over the land. They took just enough stories to keep life interesting, and just enough money to pay the bills. Now, Gendro ran West Cleft, the bar at the end of the road through the past, or the beginning, depending on where you had started. West Cleft got just about as much money as East Cleft, the bar at the opposite side of the road, and for both Gendro and Barth, who was East Cleft's owner, that was just fine. That night, the wind was blowing from West Cleft towards East Cleft, which was just hard enough to send the brush and small trees swaying side to side. And Gendro found himself up a little later than usual, winding down the tavern's common room and tidying up with the ease of a man who had nowhere in particular to go and all the time in the world to get there. The tables had been set back mostly into place, the floors were swept clean, or at least mostly clean, of dust and grime, and with a few little dabs of spit to scrub the last stains off the glasses, Gendro picked one for his end-of-evening drink while he counted the coin. It had been a good night, it seemed, as he laid out the coin into stacks of bronzes and double bronzes and the occasional silver. That would all cover expenses, with enough left over for a nice dinner the next night for family. And in fact, as Gendro noticed 2 sticky silvers that he'd missed, there was enough to sneak some of the fancy beer that he'd brought in from a Highland trader. That got Gendro in a good mood, and he hummed a little tune to himself. He loved an occasion to crack into fancy beer, and eyed the keg, which was already tapped and practically begging to be drunk, with a sneaky, devilish look. No one's gonna complain but me. Gendro grabbed a tankard and started filling it up with the frothing Highland beer. This little ritual was another that Gendro followed just about every night. If the coin was up, there was reason to celebrate and drink. If the coin was down, there was reason to mourn and drink. If the coin was exactly as expected, then that was a pretty notable occasion, and it was always observed by drinking. Gendro drained most of the beer in his glass in a single extended gulp. Then he refilled it, ignored the foam on his ample mustache, and made his way over to the chair by the window, staring out across the brushland to the trees. Things were turning a little concerning. It wasn't so much that the wind was blowing stronger than any other night, so much as it was blowing directly from the west, clear enough that you might have marked your compass by the heading of the breeze. Just steady, consistent, coming straight out of the west. Gendro squinted out into the night. Beyond the tree lines where the hills met the sky, over the northern edge of the western expanse, the dark clouds of a coming storm were headed towards them, and had already eaten the stars crowded around the horizon. True howling storms were very rare this time of year, just before winter had settled in, but Gendro was a safe man. So after setting his beer glass on a sheltered table, he began the slow and steady process of shuttering the windows, lowering the heavy wood covers and locking them shut one at a time. About midway through the process, the roll of thunder somewhere to the east brought Gendro a smile of self-satisfaction. Sometimes his wife scolded him for the late evenings closing down the bar, but he'd spotted the storm before anyone else had. And now, he would be happily snuggled up at home while others rushed around in the pouring rain trying to batten down the hatches. Just then, the strengthening wind pitched angrily at the shutters, which stretched against clanking latches as they voiced the storm's displeasure. But as the thunder rolled out again from the east, Gendro turned once, then twice. Again, something wasn't quite right. He had lived his entire life here, and though the people coming through the town often changed, the weather no longer surprised him. When the wind blew from the west, storms came from the west. When the wind blew from the east, storms came from the east. That was just the way the world worked. And yet there was another roll of thunder, closer from the east, while the western breeze continued to blow. That's not right. Grunting, Gendro made his way across the creaking floorboards to the front, and then out onto the porch, scanning the quiet road beyond West Cleft. But there was nothing out of line out there except the dairy bushes swaying in the wind. Usually, Gendro left the chairs and tables out on the deck during a storm. And most other times, nothing ever happened in Cleft after all, and who would want to steal some worn-down wooden furniture? It was probably more trouble to move and steal than the semi-reliable wood it had been built with. But against a storm like this one, which had now eaten the stars above the far end of the pasture land and was only getting closer, you could never be too careful. So Gendro set about pulling the furniture in and stacking it up inside. By the time he had brought in all of the chairs and tables, the storm had eaten the stars nearly directly overhead. And again, that thunder echoed out from the east, even closer than before and still coming from the entirely wrong direction. Gendro took a sip out of the glass that had been empty since 3 sips ago. There had been no flash of lightning from the east either. That was even stranger. Gendro turned back to the interior of the bar, quickly shutting the front door behind him and latching the thick lock on the front door shut. And as the wind continued to batter at the shutters, demanding entry through a jangling of metal latches, Gendro knew it was time to go. Quickly, he stored the coin in its usual hiding place under the floorboards. Around him, the thunder was still grumbling in waves out from the east, as the western wind slammed against the shutters, beating for entry. Standing up with the quickness of a man who hadn't quite processed that he was nervous, Gendro turned to leave, only for the thunder to roar so close by it might have come from the front porch. But then, like the eastern thunder had somehow won out against the western storm, the shutters suddenly clicked into place and fell still. Outside, the sounds of the wind still whipped through the air, but it was like here, the wooden shutters had been commanded to be silent. And against the now quiet evening, there was a clear and gentle knock at the door. Each rap was casual, almost delicate, and yet the echo of the knocks hit Gendro in his chest. A visitor? At this hour? With the great-grandpappy of a storm about ready to come through? That was strange, too. Gendro stared at the door, and yet again those gentle, almost delicate knocks echoed out. Gendro blew out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was probably just someone stranded in the rain who'd seen the lights on. Coming?